top questions that I get is, what does an actual CMMC Level 2 assessment look like? In this episode of Mostly Compliant, I got to sit down with my colleague, Michael Brooks, who is a lead CCA, and we dove into that exact topic. We do a recap overview of the CMMC assessment process, talking through the 4 phases that are involved in that, what an assessor does at each of those stages. And in this particular episode, we focused a lot on phase 1, the pre-assessment. What does an assessor look for? What do they not look for? What are the goals of a pre-assessment? So I really hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did with Michael Brooks on this episode of Mostly Compliant. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of Mostly Compliant. I am joined today by another person on the A-LIGN team here, Michael Brooks. Mike Brooks, he is a lead CCA on our team. He's involved in a lot of different projects for us, but we wanted to have him in today to talk through the CMMC assessment process, the CAP, as it's referred to. So we're going to talk a lot about the CAP overall. What is the goal? What is that? And then we're going to dive specifically into phase 1. So Mike, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Hey, Matt. Yeah, thanks, man. It's great to be on your show. I really appreciate it. Appreciate everything you're doing. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to dive into this. I know right before we started recording, we were talking about there's a lot of fun topics within the CAP and a lot of specific language that we can dive into, but let's start at a high level. Let's just assume people are barely, if at all, familiar with CAP. What is that? So let's start with that. The CMMC assessment process, the CAP.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that just an A-LIGN document? Is that just our assessment process? Is that from the Cyber AB? Mike, give us an overview on what is the CAP? How was it formed? What's its purpose? Just give us a high level overview.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a great question. The CMMC assessment process, referred to as the CAP, that is found on the DoD CIO's page. It is a Cyber AB document. It is an official governing DoD document on how Level 2 certification assessments are to be conducted for the certified third-party assessment organizations, the C3PAOs. So the CAP is relevant for any organization seeking certification that's going down the C3PAO or the Certified Third-Party Assessment Organization route. And it lays out the steps to follow in order to get an organization from the beginning to the end of the process. So from we need a certification to fully certified.
Yeah, so it's generally an attempt to create some uniformity across all C3PAOs, right? Is that fair to say? Basically, the Cyber AB says, hey, we want to put together a process so that C3PAOs, the CMMC third-party assessment organizations that issue these level 2 certifications, have something to follow, so that if you're an organization seeking certification and you go to one C3PAO and get assessed, it's not an astronomically different process than somebody who went to a completely different C3PAO. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. I mean, the major muscle movements will be the same. It's a very well-defined process. So the steps that you need to go through are defined, and how you go through those, may be a little bit different depending on the C3PAO that you're working with. And hopefully you are working with a C3PAO. There's a plug for the CMMC marketplace. If you're going to do a certified CMMC level 2 assessment, please go to the marketplace and make sure that your vendor is listed in there as an authorized certified third-party assessment organization. That's kind of a key point.
It is a key point, and there are a lot of things that oftentimes feel like they can go without saying. That is one of them, but I am glad when we don't, because you'd be shocked at what happens out there in the market, at what certain companies might market themselves as, right? Incorrectly. So Mike brings up a great point. If anybody's saying they're a C3PAO, or if you're looking for a C3PAO, there is one authoritative source for that, and that is the Cyber AB marketplace.
Exactly.
So Mike, let's start diving into it. So now that we have kind of an overview on what it is, and one thing I want to call out as of the time of the recording this, let's look at V2. We're looking at version 2, right? I think that's important to call out. There was a previous V1 that has now been superseded. So if anybody's looking for relevant information, make sure you find version 2.0. So again, this is an official document. So let's talk through that document. So at the very beginning, they kind of go over what is the CAP, like an introduction, how to use it. But then they go over these 4 main phases. There's 4 phases to it. Mike, do you mind giving an overview on what those 4 phases are and the high level sort of goal or maybe tasks associated with each of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first phase is a pre-assessment phase. And this is very important phase. This is really to assess your readiness before we go into a formal assessment. So it's almost like a pre-check or a validation of things like your system security plan, your posture, preliminary look at evidence, not an in-depth look at evidence. We're not making a decision, a pass-fail, met, not met decision in phase one. We're simply trying to gauge a level of readiness and a level of maturity in the documentation and with the organization seeking certification. So that's phase one pre-assessment. You exit phase one pre-assessment. There's a pre-assessment form that we have to fill out. We send that off to the DoD. That gets entered into their system, EMAS. And then we go to phase two. Phase two is the conformity assessment. That is the actual assessment, the detailed assessment where we go into detail. We look at all the evidence. We do field work. That is the detailed assessment in phase two. And then we have phase three, which is reporting our results into the DoD of phase two. And then phase four is, award and closeout, issue certificate and closeout POAM. So plan of actions and milestones, you can get a conditional certification. There are very specific things that are POAMable, plan of actions and milestones. So, we do talk to companies a lot that think, oh, you know what, I'll just get a conditional. You'll tell me what the things I need to fix. I'll fix those things in the 180 days I have, and, off we go. And not everything is POAMable. So it's very important to understand that kind of going in. But those are the four phases: pre-assessment, phase one; conformity assessment, phase two; report the results; and then close out an award in phase four.
Okay, so I know that this is not part of the CAP, but while I'm thinking about it, because I talk to a lot of clients, and every time I go through this talking point, the first question that they ask around this time is, well, how long does all of that process take? So we're taking a little bit of a detour from the CAP. Let's talk through a little bit of what does that process take? We talk about 4 phases. At a high level, I talk through clients. It can take anywhere from, and again, this is assuming some scoping variables, but around 4 to 6 weeks roughly for all of the phases combined, including some of the upfront checks, the QA process that we need on the back end with our reporting, uploading, outreach meeting, all that sort of stuff. Is there anything you would comment on that? Does that jive with, how you usually see these play out?
Yeah, that tracks along with what I see. But, what I kind of tell folks too is think about it in terms of maybe a quarter, because when people are coming and knocking down your door, they're, hopefully you're not getting somebody that says, you need to get certified right now. And if somebody does show up and say, hey, we need you certified right now, it's 2 to 3 month process, right? So if you think about it in terms of a quarter from when you start in Q1, you should be able to finish towards the end of Q1 or in Q2, and give yourself some lead time because there are things in this process, right, that are out of the control of us as the C3PAO, out of the control of the organization seeking certification. And, we're dealing with other processes there, government processes that we don't have any influence over. And as the lines get longer, these processes are going to be probably more drawn out because there's limited resources, being applied to these things. And so, 2 to 3 months, but again, is a good planning factor is a quarter to think of it as, as that.
Yeah, it's a really good call out and a really good point, especially when I would talk to clients about FedRAMP in particular in years prior. That was more the focus. That was always my point. I was like, hey, if there's timing delays, it is usually not because of your 3PAO, right? Especially when we're involving the federal government with an agency sponsorship, as we are with the FedRAMP authorization. So I think it's a really good point to call out. It's like real world application, how these actually operate. There's all sorts of variables, and maybe you have an MSP or a separate ESP that needs to be involved, and then you're having trouble getting what you need from them. And there's all those sorts of factors that can kind of drag it out. So I think adding in that wiggle room can be really helpful. Okay, so that's a high-level overview. I think for a majority of this episode, I would love to dive deeper into phase one, conduct the pre-assessment. So there's a lot of questions I get around this. What is it? What is it not? More importantly, one thing I want to touch on, and then I want to get your thoughts, Mike, before we dive into some of the nuance of what the CAP calls out in terms of what we need to do or not do in phase one. It's just to piggyback off of your overview there a little bit. I often get the question of, hey, is that phase one basically a gap or mock audit? And I say, no, it is not. Because again, to your point, we are not looking at the conformity met or not met. to each of the controls, each of the assessment objectives. We're not doing that detailed level of a review of the evidence. We're doing a higher level review of documentation along with some other steps that we need to do. So I'll just throw it over. Add anything else you want to that, but then I would love to dive into, okay, if it's not that, what is it?
Yeah, exactly. And so the pre-assessment, as we look at the CAP and we're talking about the CAP, again, please go to the DoD CIO website and under the resources section, that is where you can download the current version of the CAP. That is where the authoritative document is housed and where you can get it. When we talk about phase one pre-assessment, really there's a lot of work that goes on left of that, right? And all of the work that goes on left of that is this readiness, implementation work, getting things ready, and culminating really in a self-assessment. Now, whether you hire an external partner to do your internal assessment or you do it yourselves, there's really that internal self-assessment. You've got to be able to go through the entire process yourself. There are actually control requirements in the 3.12 family around self-assessment and control assessments.
Yeah.
So as you head into your formal assessment, you should really, and I talk to the leadership folks and I tell them, you really should have a good idea of your standing before you go into formal assessment, because you should have done a complete self-assessment. So that's critically important work left of the pre-assessment. I'm a retired Air Force myself. I come from the RMF NIST world. I thought everybody came from that world, but apparently they don't.
Very few, actually. Yeah. Shocked to find out. It's the inverse.
Yeah. And, in that process, in the RMF process, the security assessment plan and the security assessment report, just like in the FedRAMP world, are critically important to me as an authorizing official or an affirming official, because that's what provides me the assurance that our teams are doing the control checks, right? We're doing the implementation checks. We're collecting the evidence. We've got green lights, and that the person signing the form can actually sign the form with confidence. So that would be the ideal input into the pre-assessment phase, would be, documentation that supports a very thorough internal assessment. That being said, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's a really great point, especially that, there's going to be a control where we're going to sort of check and validate that you're doing that, right? That all the more reason to actually do it. But I do think that's really important to highlight, because again, I get this question a lot of people's ears sort of perk up sometimes when they hear the phase one and they go, oh, are you basically just going to mock and tell us if we're going to pass or not? And again, that is not what this is intended or designed to do.
Exactly. And the phase one pre-assessment was really built into the process as a pre-check, because a lot of folks were going through the earlier processes and having, false starts, right? Meaning that they would go through formal assessment and the assessors would say, there's not enough here to do an assessment. This doesn't line up with what our expectations are. It doesn't look like a dog. It doesn't act like a dog. It's not a dog. I'm sorry, it's just not. And so it was really smart idea to build that pre-assessment in to the process as a pre-check, to just say, okay, that helps the OSCs. It helps us. It helps the overall process. And again, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, this may look different, right? There may be maturity built into the model, and the pre-assessment, it may go away as we mature the process. But right now, It's critically important, because it is really what we're using to kind of validate that the OSCs are ready for formal assessment without, wasting their time and wasting our time and everybody else's time.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and read just to start diving into some of the more specific segments that are called out in the CAP around phase one and what we as the C3PAOs need to perform in that. So I'll read these first two sentences, which give kind of the overview. In phase one, the C3PAO will evaluate if the OSC, organization seeking certification, has adequately prepared for the assessment of its implementation of CMMC Level 2 security requirements. At the conclusion of phase one, the C3PAO will submit the pre-assessment information form into the CMMC instantiation of EMAS. So at a high level, that gives you a sense of what Mike and I have been chatting about here, right? We are evaluating if they have adequately prepared for the assessment of its implementation. That is not, we are evaluating its implementation, right? We're evaluating that you are adequately prepared. So then it goes on to describe, okay, how do you check whether they are adequately prepared? And the very first thing that it calls out, first of all, it says the lead CCA will supervise these activities. So the lead CCA will be the one involved in phase one. But then it says review the system security plan, the SSP, everybody's favorite document. Mike, give us an overview on what actually happens here, because one of the fun things that I tell clients, I'll quote this verbatim, and this is a theme that we'll talk about through this episode, is there's a lot of what you could say are subjective terms used in this, right? And so 3 that I love here, the adjectives they use are C3PAO personnel shall review the OSC's SSP and examine the document for completeness, accuracy, and consistency. Obviously, those aren't clearly defined metrics. That's a little bit subjective. So how would you describe this actual review of the SSP? What are C3PAOs and lead CCAs actually looking for? What's good? What's bad? Give us an overview there.
Yeah, great question. So, the system security plan is really the Bible of how the OSCs are implementing all of their controls. And again, there's an assessment guide that is provided for to help with the development of the system security plan. The CMMC Level 2 Assessment Guide specifies that the organization seeking certification needs to delineate not just how they're meeting the control requirement, the NIST 800-171 control requirement, but there's also control objectives inside of each requirement, and they've got to map their implementation to those objectives. So that's really the first thing we're looking for, to see if those assessment objectives are addressed in the SSP. Meaning, when we click into a control and we look at the SSP, it should say, okay, this is how we're meeting this control, and this control has 4 subparts or 4 objectives. This is how we're meeting subpart A or objective A. This is how we're meeting subpart B, subpart C, subpart D. If those are not broken out, it gets very difficult to figure out in the language if those things are being met or not. So, and that's not explicitly documented in the template, right? That's just something that you kind of learn as you go through the process, right? So it's like you've got to make sure that your SSP is not only mapped to the NIST 800-171 controls, but mapped to the NIST 800-171A objectives, because those are the pieces and parts that have to be met for the actual control to be met. So that's the first thing.
That's great. Yeah, I always call that out. And it's very hit or miss on whether clients are aware of that or not. But just in case they're not, I always try to call out for clients. Hey, have you just been self-attesting for years? Okay, cool. Not sure if you're familiar with NIST 800-171A, the assessment methodology, but It calls out these assessment objectives that, to your point, are very clearly, I think, delineated and called out in that assessment guidance. So that document is super helpful. We'll link to that below. Check that out. But that's a really good point. That is a great thing to check for first. Hey, do they even address these assessment objectives? If not a great sign, right? So, okay, they've got the assessment objectives laid out. Fantastic. What other things are you looking for in the SSP?
Yeah, the next big thing that we look for is scoping, right? So there are nuances built into the CMMC model that require your assets to be categorized a certain way. CMMC lays out the asset categories of CUI asset, meaning that particular asset stores, processes, or transmits control and classified information. That means its control posture needs to be full and complete, encompassing all 320 objectives. So we need to know, where are the CUI assets? Those are critically important, right? Then there are security protection assets. That's another CMMC ism, where you've got to go, okay, well, what's a security protection asset? Never heard of that before. Again, go to the documentation. The CMMC Level 2 Scoping Guide lays out all of the asset categories. So we're looking for that. What are your security protection assets? There are also contractor risk managed assets. There are specialized assets. There are out-of-scope assets. So we're really looking to get a sense of the scope of the environment and of the assets in the environment, because we need to understand, where does the CUI go? Where is it stored? Where is it processed? Where is it transmitted? What is supporting that from a tooling perspective, from a vendor perspective, from a facility perspective? And so we need to be able to understand that, at a glance in the SSP. as well as the OSC and their leadership team. They should be able to look at their own diagram and go, we see, okay, yep, site 1, site 2, got it. Okay, application there, boom. If they don't have that level of visibility, it's really hard to move forward in the assessment because it's not clear, right? It's not clear where the CUI assets are. So in conjunction with the asset listing, the network diagram and the data flow diagram are also critically important on this pre-assessment check to see. And again, it's not a pass or fail. It's not a met or not met. It's just, an indicator of, are all the right pieces and parts in place?
An indicator. I think that's a good piece of terminology to use, because I think another word that you'll see throughout the CAP, especially in this later phase 1, is that the lead CCA needs to have confidence around certain things, right? You need to have confidence of availability of personnel, availability of evidence, confidence. So I think that's a good terminology to use here again, because again, important to keep in mind, the CAP does not call out specific, definitions around a lot of these things, like, oh, you need to see X number of Y or whatever it might be. So that's great. That bleeds into the next point that the CAP calls out around validating CMMC assessment scope. So that's part of what you try to do there in the SSP as well, is through the network diagrams, the data flow diagrams, and just everything that they've called out around, any external vendors and anybody that might be involved in this and where CUI assets flow and all that. You're basically validating that they have a scope, they have a clearly defined scope, and that you as the assessor now have a good understanding as to what assets are what, and where is the actual scope, where is the actual boundary. And if not, that would be a negative indication for you and potentially lead to an unfavorable recommendation at the end of phase 1. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it would be very difficult to provide a favorable recommendation going into phase 2. It doesn't mean we don't move to phase 2, right? You can think of it as green, yellow, red. I mean, that would be a red scenario, maybe a yellow to red scenario. But yeah, those are the key things that we're looking for from an assessment perspective. The other thing would be, once we understand that, and we're kind of working, from the SSP to the diagram, now we're looking at the organization. Like, who are you in the eyes of the DoD, right? And that comes with an item called a cage code, right? That's a very important. That's a very important thing. And we were talking this morning at another event about cage codes. We got into some conversations about cage codes because there are very good reasons why you would want to structure your legal business entities a certain way, right? Whether it's for taxes or resources or investors or whatever those reasons might be.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is you end up with, 15 or 16 sub companies and companies that aren't even really part of your other company. And then you look at this mess and it's like the poor person that has to do the CMMC scoping, provides a cage code. And it's like, well, that's not even really the company we're looking at. We're looking at another company. So I say all that to say that cage codes and the organizational structure become very important as well, because we want to make sure that the organization that we're evaluating and the system security plan that we're evaluating represents the entity that we're talking with. And in some cases, it doesn't.
Yeah. That obviously, that's as red as they come, I would imagine. As far as the lights are concerned. Yeah, I get a lot of questions around the cage codes and the entities that are within scope, especially when you start looking at larger enterprise organizations that have multiple business units, or they're a parent company to X, Y, and Z, and they all are on different cage codes, but can we all be under one certification? So if that's something that you as an organization have not thoroughly thought through, potentially with an advisor or somebody to think about like what is best and what actually covers what we need, highly, highly, highly recommend, starting there, making sure we're thinking about this from the correct organizational standpoint in terms of who and what coverage needs the certification, right?
Yeah, doubtful. That's a foot stomp for sure. I mean, and again, the folks that are working on the CMMC project or the implementation, right, they may think they know, but they may not know, and again, it all matters on what the government system says, because it feeds, there's a sam.gov that feeds the SPRS that feed, there's different things that are feeding this, and you can have multiple cage codes. I'm not saying you can't have multiple cage codes. You absolutely can. It just needs to be structured correctly so that those cage codes are aligned underneath a parent organization, and they don't show up as two separate organizations where it's like, now we're external to ourselves.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
That's where we start to look at potentially separate assessments, separate certifications, all that stuff. And some clients I talk to, they're like, that's just how we're structured, and that is the ideal situation for us, and we need multiple certifications. Okay,
Yep.
cool,
Yes,
right? But understanding that up top is really critical. And if you don't, this is our chance to catch it here in phase one, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, Mike, a couple other ones that we talked through that I want to talk through here that are called out in the CAP. So the next, I think one, but there's two subjects that I want to touch on. Confirm availability of evidence. I believe there's also in here, it calls out confirm the availability of personnel to be interviewed as well. How does that actually function? Do you just is it a vibe check? Do you just through conversation with them get a sense for whether they actually have evidence or not? Do you ask them to show you anything? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, so in some cases, again, we work with companies that are ready, and they know they're ready, and they want to get through the process, and they're ready to get through the process. And it's like, here's all of our evidence. Here's our SSP. We're ready to go. Here it is. And it's like, awesome. This is great. This is exactly what we need. They're working with the right people on implementation and readiness. This is where partners are critically important, because folks need to understand the process. And again, I would point folks back to the CMMC marketplace to make sure they're working with certified CMMC professionals and people that understand this process, because it's very nuanced. I mean, when I left the military, and came into the civilian world, I was against going to get my CMMC certifications, because I'm like, I understand all this. I've done this my whole career, no big deal. And then I started getting exposed to all this nuance, and I was like, oh, this is different. This is very, very different. Well, we have that scenario, right? And that's a great scenario. And there are a lot of companies that are ready and are ready to prove they're ready, because they want to get through this process.
Yeah.
Then you have the others that are like, oh, we have some evidence, and here it is, and it looks good, right? And it's like, okay, there's enough there to move forward. And then there's the companies that, we asked for a sample of evidence. It doesn't have to be everything, right? Just a sample. Can you show us some screenshots and different things? And then we ask again. And then we ask again for evidence. And then we go down that
You're
road.
like, I see where this is going. Yeah. I don't think you have any.
Yeah, those are the use cases that we see, the spectrum of what we see. But, again, if they've done their prep work, if they've done their own internal self-assessments, they themselves have had to look at evidence, and they should have specified in their own security assessment plan, this is how we are validating that this control is working. I check the locks twice a day. I check it once in the morning and once at night. Oh, okay, and here's a picture of me checking the lock. It's like, okay, well, that works for us too.
Yeah. It's funny you call that out. On a recent episode, I had Jacob Horn on, and one thing that he called out was, it's interesting how many people seem to breathe a sigh of relief at the thought of getting a level 2 self-attestation versus an external certification, because you should be looking at all the same stuff, exactly what you called out there, right? You should be looking at all the same assessment objectives. You should have the same evidence artifacts to prove these things. But for some reason, there's a gap there, and we all know why, because the whole reason CMMC exists. They weren't doing it in that thorough of a manner, right? Okay, so I think there's a couple other key topics here in phase one that I'd like to touch on. So there's some stuff later on that's like, we compose the assessment team, the pre-assessment form. But before we get to that, this is kind of what this has all been culminating to. Determine readiness for assessment. We shall make a determination on their readiness. So this is where those lights come into play, Mike. Is that fair to say? Like green, yellow, red, and then from here, is that where you give a sense? And again, to my understanding, we don't force anybody. We're not going to say we won't do phase 2, we won't do blah, blah, blah. But this is where we would give a recommendation and say, hey, we would recommend maybe putting a pause on before we do phase 2 or whatever that would be. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it would be a recommendation, and I'm a hard copy guy. I've got the hard copy here. When I was a young enlisted guy back in the mid 90s, I worked for a master sergeant who was E7. He was like a 9-star general to me at the time. And he would always tell me, go to the book to get the answer. Go to the book to get the answer. Pretend I'm following you around saying, go to the book to get the answer. So the answers are in the book. Absolutely. What we're looking for specifically is to make sure that they have those things that are ready, that they're available, and that we can look at them. If we don't find what we need, we have to provide a written response. We're obligated to provide a full written response, basically justifying the rationale behind our, and I'll use our quotes, not ready, or our recommendation that there's additional work that needs to occur. This is frustrating. It's frustrating for the OSCs. It's frustrating for us. Again, this problem hopefully goes away in 12, 24, 36 months as we mature the model and everybody understands where the bar is and what it looks like and what it takes to clear the bar. But right now it's kind of nebulous, and we really, we work with our clients to the degree that we can. We cannot provide any sort of remediation advice. We're in a little bit of a tough spot because there's a line that we cannot cross from an independence perspective that's critically important to the integrity of the entire process. So unfortunately, we can't give them a punch list of things to go fix. It's more just general guidance on, these are the things we're seeing. This is our recommendation. And that's kind of where we leave it, because it is really on them to be ready. And we do need to take the subjectivity out of the model, from the, the OSCs, they have a lot of work to do on the readiness side, and they've got to come ready and they've got to be ready. But, we in the assessor community, we really need to work hard on getting the subjectivity out of the model and really defining what right looks like.
Yeah, I think that's great, because it is hard, right, to describe this to clients when we're having to fall back on words like confidence. We have to have confidence. Okay, how do you get confident, right? What do I need to provide to make you confident? Just to further hammer home a point that you just made, right? So I'm reading under the section that says, from the CAP, adverse determination of assessment readiness, which is the hypothetical that you just ran through. All right, I'm quoting here. Under no circumstances shall the C3PAO, its assessment team, or any other affiliated personnel offer any advice, implementation assistance, or recommendations as to how the OSC can improve or enhance their preparedness for a replanned or rescheduled CMMC Level 2 certification assessment. And, basically follow the code of professional conduct, that sort of stuff. So it's a really important point, right? Like, this is an opportunity to basically give you guys pause. And I'll say phase one is an opportunity for the OSCs, right? To your point, hopefully everybody would understand, whether internally or working with a really good partner that helps them understand what that bar is and where they need to come in. But not everybody is right now. So phase one really is your opportunity to not have a failed assessment. But to Mike's point, nobody wants that. That's not ideal for us. We know it's not ideal for you guys. So we're certainly not like looking for and trying to find stuff in phase one. But at the same time, I think it's really important to call out, no C3PAO at this phase could then go, all right, here's what happened. Go fix this and go do that. That is a very clear line that they have crossed, right?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And again, all of this work really occurs left of the pre-assessment. The pre-assessment should really just be a quick check of like, okay, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Can you run from here to the mailbox? Okay, good. Can you do 2 push-ups? Okay, good. Okay, we can proceed. That's really, really the intent of the pre-assessment. It's not like you had mentioned earlier. It's not intended to be a mock audit. That's not its intent. So again, going left of the pre-assessment, that internal work that's occurring for the affirming official, who is an official person that has a role in this process, a leader, an executive leader on the OSC side, they really should have assurance before they even enter into this process that, that they're good to go, and that if there are gaps, they understand what their gaps are. And if they're on an accelerated timeline or they're working through some implementation changes, that those things are known, those things are understood, but that they're ready to actually go through a formal assessment. Yeah. And I think as we, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just going to say, and as this process matures, we're going to start with level 2 self-assessments, right? That's the initial intent. And we're going to move to, there are going to be some select solicitations that require the level 2 certified third-party assessment. Why is that? Well, because those particular programs have, a lot of sensitive data. So DoD ultimately trusts this process, right? We do this work on behalf of the DoD. That is who we are serving, right? That is our ultimate customer in this. We have the privilege of certifying these defense vendors, and it's work that we take very seriously. And it's not a rubber stamp. It's not you get to pass straight through. It is something that we take very seriously. And we want to help people get through the process because we want to see them on the other side. And I'd also tell people, getting certified, whether a self-assessment 110 or an actual certification assessment, that is not the end. That is the beginning, right?
Yep.
This really needs to be maintained over time and managed over time.
Yep. All right, Mike, this has been fantastic. I think we did a pretty thorough overview of phase one and the overall cap. You and I haven't chatted too much about this, but I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into phase two. Maybe we go control family by control family, something like that. But yeah, if you're down and everybody, if you're interested, let us know. We'd love to dive deeper into phase two, the actual assessment and what that looks like. But Mike, thank you again so much for joining me. I thought this was fantastic. Any last parting words of an overview? Anything you want to say about the cap, phase one, anything we've talked about at all?
I'll just tell people, I have something on my desk that's been on my desk for a very long time. It's Colin Powell's 13 Rules of Leadership. Rule number 4 is it can be done. And that is what I would tell people. This can be done. There are 200 companies that have already gone through the process. Yes, it can be a frustrating process. Yes, it can be a little bit nebulous, but if you're committed, if your leadership team is truly committed and you understand the why behind all of this, this can be done. And we are here to support you through that process. We want to get you through the process and provide whatever help and assistance we can. So, those would be my parting words is it can be done. Hang in there and press on through and let's get certified to get to the other side and protect our defense industrial base and get our warfighters the stuff that they need.
I love it. I love a little bit of optimism. Sometimes some of the folks in the industry can get a little pessimistic about this requirement coming down on them. So I think it's a great dose of optimism. Mike, thank you so much again for joining me here today. And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. We'll see you all next time.